Let's stick with this story, these ongoing tensions between Canada and China. We're joined now by Charles Burton. He's a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and a former counselor at the Canadian Embassy in Beijing. Good to see you, Charles.
Hi, Greg.
All right, so Minister Carr was on the program earlier today, basically said they are not willing in Ottawa to make the link between Meng Wanzhou, the arrest of Huawei's CFO, and the actions that we've seen China take against us. How do you see the situation?
Well, I disagree with the minister. I think it's directly connected to the ongoing dispute between Canada and China, simply because of the very heavy-handed response of the Chinese government to a matter which seems to be a problem of documentation and certainly not indicative of anything that justifies banning all Canadian meat going into that big market. It takes 22% of our pork. So it does seem to be an escalation of retaliation past the canola and soybeans into a product which is more central Canada, Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, than the canola seeds, which are grown further west. If you look at it, we have been sending to the Chinese some mixed signals because of statements by former Prime Minister Chrétien, which suggested that the Canadian government should order the Minister of Justice to squash the ongoing extradition hearing for Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou by the BC Superior Court, and then most recently by former Canadian Ambassador to China, John McCallum, who's back in Beijing doing business now, who suggested that Mr. Trump might just decide to direct his New York State authorities to no longer pursue Ms. Meng on the charges of fraud and therefore withdraw the extradition order to Canada. So I do feel that part of it could be due to political mismanagement on our part and to a Chinese misunderstanding of the likelihood of Ms. Meng being repatriated. Her lawyers did, just a couple of days ago, put in a new plea for the case to be thrown out on using these political criteria, specifically the statement of Mr. Chrétien. So I don't think our government will do that. I don't think we're going to stop the extradition hearing. So despite this pressure being put on the Canadian economy, I don't see it delivering the desired result for China.
Now, when it comes to the G20 meeting in Japan later this week, it doesn't seem that Justin Trudeau will get an audience with Xi Jinping, but we know that there was a meeting planned between Trump and Xi Jinping on Saturday. Now, Mr. Trump did say he would raise some of our concerns. Do we put much faith that the Americans are going to argue our case in the short amount of time they get with China's president?
I see it as unlikely, and even if it's raised, the only way that one can induce the Chinese to, say, release Michael Kovrig in Michael's favor would be if Mr. Trump threatens some sort of retaliatory action against China if that doesn't happen forthwith. And this is really a moral matter because, the reason that Ms. Meng is being detained in Canada is because of the request of the United States. So morally, the United States should take some responsibility for the horrendous consequences that this has had for Canada. But I don't think that Mr. Trump is someone who, is strong on moral obligation. So I'm not confident that at the end of his meeting with Mr. Xi that we'll be seeing the resolution of the current massive crisis in Canada-China relations.
Now, you spoke earlier about a sort of mixed political messages coming out of this country. Former Prime Minister saying maybe we do just drop the extradition. Maybe this is what gets us. It seems to be at this point, it's very frustrating for these industries. I talked to canola producers, and now we have the meat production industry as well. They're looking for scientific-based solutions in the canola area. But in the end, as you were saying, it only seems to come down to one issue. Meng Wanzhou, will she be sent back? And that would make everything go away. But it doesn't seem to be something that we're willing to do in Canada.
No, I don't think that we can abrogate our obligation to the extradition treaty. She will get due process of law if it turns out that in the prudent judgment of the BC Superior Court, the United States request for extradition is based on political factors and not because she's committed serious fraud, which is also a crime in Canada, of course. Then she'll be allowed to go back to Beijing. And even if she is extradited to the United States, I think we can be confident that she will have a strong defense against those serious charges. So from our point of view, I don't think that we have any basis for telling the United States that we don't think that you'll give Ms. Meng a fair shake, or we don't think that Ms. Meng deserves to be made accountable for these actions that you allege that she's committed. So, we're pretty much stuck with that. And our only hope is really to convince the Chinese either by discussion, which doesn't work, or by some effective Canadian retaliation to make them realize that their cost for engaging in this kind of gross violation of the norms of the international rules-based order through these arrests and completely spurious non-tariff barriers against Canadian agricultural commodity exports into China.
Thanks for your time and your insight today, Charles.
Good to speak with you.
That was Charles Burton, Senior Fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and also a former counselor at the Canadian Embassy in Beijing.